All right, friends, thank you very much for joining in. And here is another edition of the Multimillionaire Forum, a place where we put very simple ideas in front of you in a very effective and a very practical manner where you can almost the next day or the next Monday go ahead and make use of these opportunities, these possibilities, and get on to your journey or add another dimension to your journey of investments. So this time we are going to talk about PSUs, the public sector undertakings. And before we go any further, as per rules, we have to declare a disclaimer. Standard disclaimer is any information contained in this webinar is not investment advice. Investments in equity markets are subject to volatility, and hence one should consult experts and take financial decisions. And this is a purely educational session. When we talk about PSU as a sector, there are so many things happening in this space. And while we were doing the research, while we were studying this thing, we found that this is something which a lot of people are not speaking of. A lot of mutual funds are not talking of this. A lot of investment ideas that we have do have some sort of representation of this sector, but not in a manner in which it really deserves to be. I'm going to distribute this little session in three different parts. We are going to talk about, within PSUs, we are going to talk about defense as a sector because there is a lot of activity happening in defense. We're going to talk about banking, and then we will talk about the other things like power and infrastructure. So in that sense, in the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm just going to share with you some very interesting, very powerful research that we've done, but in a very simple sort of a manner, And I'm going to start by showing you a few pictures. You might find this very interesting. Okay, I'm going to just share some pictures with you on the screen. This is all related to Indian defense. So, in the sense, what's happening in this space, it's unbelievable. Okay, just here's a look at some of these things. And these are borrowed from various places, Mint, Wyon, etc. In financial year 23, approximately 2.7 lakh crore rupees of defense equipment is something that we propose to manufacture. Just think about that. But that's not in itself something astounding. What is even very, very interesting is that 99% of all of this is going to happen from Indian industries, which means that the government is saying, Atmanirbhar Bano, let everything be manufactured from and by Indian companies. Now, that's the crux of the matter. We are not importing these things. We're building our defense capability, and pretty much the entire defense budget is actually going to be spent as sales revenue for hundreds of Indian industries, hundreds of Indian companies. Think about that. Atmanirbhar Bharat is actually happening to another level. Of course, we don't have any political agenda here, but we're just speaking what research seems extremely appealing. This is something else I found very, very interesting. I didn't know that there were 194 defense startups that have happened, which is crazy, right? Already there is at least about 30, 40 listed companies which are doing extremely well. I'm sure there are a lot of other companies which are not listed, but then there are almost 200 startups happening in the defense space. Just think about how much focus is happening. And, somewhere I was reading a report where the intention of the government is that every agricultural field is sort of monitored by a drone, which means the drone technology in our country should be so large that not only it serves defense purposes, but also serves civilian purposes. So imagine the amount of strength and the amount of growth that some of these startups will have for us. The defense budget is quite a significant amount for 2025. These are all things. India is actually a defense exporter. Now, did you know that? This particular picture is saying 42 countries. Another report that I was reading says that we are now exporting to as many as 80 countries around the world. Maybe 10 years back, we didn't really think of something like that happening. But today, India has become a major player in the global arms market. We are making guns, we are making tanks, we are making missiles, and we're selling this to people. Now, what happens is this information is coming to us in very, very fragmented pieces. It's not really coming to you as here's a presentation, this is what the government's doing. But constantly there is something or the other which is hitting the news. Either there is some sort of a joint venture which is happening, either we are manufacturing submarines for somebody through a collaboration, or the traditional thing of which we always knew that we were a market which was basically the ports of Alang and all of these were bringing in all the ships and decommissioned vessels, and we used to break it down and sell the goods. But here, something reverse is happening. People are actually talking to us about buying ships which are made in India and by Indians. It's amazing in terms of the space that India has suddenly taken, and which obviously means that the whole world is looking at us with a lot of awe. And at the same time, I'm sure people like the American markets and the Russian markets are not very happy about it, because if we are going to start manufacturing so much indigenously, then that means that we will be importing lesser and lesser from these countries. Huge, yeah. Some more numbers that came to us. These are just slides. I collected this from Mint. 1,75,000 crore of defense manufacturing, which is nothing but sales for Indian companies and also government companies. By the way, government companies are playing a very, very big role in this space. But at the same time, these companies are also taking orders and we are exporting. So 35,000 crores, huge beginning happening. So, I mean, can you see me? We are making trucks. We are, sending these across to the whole world. Apparently, very recently, we donated some 500 such trucks to United Nations peacekeeping force. These are just some examples of our exports. It's amazing, right? The kind of stuff that we are sharing and the kind of stuff that we are, bringing to the whole world. So that's defense. I mean, there is a lot more happening. I can go on and on, but in the interest of time, and just to give you a flavor, the whole idea is think about what's happening now. These new startups that I spoke of and these private companies that are listed, which is all right. I mean, they are there, but there is a lot of government companies who are playing a huge role in the manufacture of this defense equipment. In fact, they are the ones who are actually leading the sector at the moment. Okay, now for a while, let's kind of shift our focus onto banking. To talk about the Indian state-owned banking system, I need to go a little bit into the history, maybe about 10, 12 years into history. And what used to happen is, due to political and corporate connections, there was a time in India where a lot of money was given to corporate sector by these state-owned banks, and obviously for various reasons. Now, as a result of that, these banks and this sector was looked at a sector which is almost kind of non-existent. It's like a forgotten area. We know for a fact that this bank exists. We can see them around us. We can see them on our streets. We can see them in our commercial complexes. We know this A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all these banks exist, and they have been around maybe for more than 100 years. But at the same time, we almost would ignore their presence because we knew that the customer service was pathetic. There was no technology to speak of. And, these banks were really speaking the personal courtyard of politicians and corporate czars who would come together, do something, and borrow money from these banks. And of course, as a result of which, we saw a lot of scams also. But there has been a lot of reformation happening in this space, which is very interesting. So 10 years back, there was a new methodology when this current Sri Narendra Modi ji's government, when that government came into power in 2014, what they started doing was they put in something called a AQR, asset quality review. So what does this asset quality review really do? It looks at the fact that we have got assets of banks are naturally the loans that they have given to a whole variety of people, individuals as well as corporate sector. So they want to start reviewing what sort of assets are we having, which loans are basically serving us well, and how many loans have actually become bad. And if these loans have become bad, then let us recognize that these loans have become bad and let's make the appropriate provision for it. Provision is a very deep financial word, but in very simple sense, it means that if I have given money to 5 people, say 100 rupees to 5 of my friends, and out of that, 3 of them are, paying me some interest back on time, everything's fine. but two of them have actually not paid me for the last maybe 2 years. So I need to recognize that fact that they haven't paid me. They owe me so much of interest. And I know that they are not in a capacity to pay me back. So what's going to happen is that at some point of time, I will have to consider writing it off. So I make a provision in my personal balance sheet. I assume that out of these 500 rupees, 200 rupees look like a bad debt, and this 200 is never going to come. So let me just forget about it. And that 200 is actually my NPA, if you like. So 200 divided by 500 is about 40% of my money that I have given out. And that becomes my non-performing asset, or NPA, very simply put. And this is the story with all these banks as well. So the idea was first to recognize this. Now, the next step was to try and restructure. So go back to these lenders. I can go back to my friends and say, hey, what's your problem? And why can't you pay me? Can you pay me a lesser interest? Can you pay me in smaller installments? Whatever was your EMI, can you pay me 1/3 of that EMI? Can you make it even smaller? So can you do all of that? Uh, so things like that. I would restructure. Then, if that doesn't work, and at the same time, I find that the person does have assets, I will start doing some recovery. Maybe I will do some, legal action also if need be. So I will try and recover that either by friendly negotiations and in an extreme case under a legal action. And thereafter, once all this gets done, finally, whatever I'm left with, where companies have shut down, where things have just gone completely haywire, the banks were told to take a decision to write it off. And you know how much money was written off? Some reports that I read says that an insane amount of 10 lakh crores was written off. Okay. Now, it's like cancer, or it's like, I mean, doctors amongst yourselves would understand that what happens when you have a limb, or, a part of your body which is cancerous, you need to operate it and you need to remove it, right? Exactly the same way, this pool of asset, these bunch of loans that were there were toxic. They were really dragging the balance sheet of the banks down. They were making the banks look bad. So they said, let's write it off. So almost 20% of the bank's total loans that they were given. I mean, imagine 20% was NPAs. It's crazy. So that means 1 out of every 5 loans that were given have become bad. But it's not exactly that way, because the loan and everything in life works in the same 80-20 ratio. So there are these 20-30% people who've taken such large loans that it becomes 1/5 of all the monies that all these banks have lent together. The government then came out with another very interesting step, saying that, okay, we write off kar diya, we've closed all these loans. Now, the next thing that we'll do is, let's sort of merge banks together. Let's make partners, let's make like a buddy system. So you're a strong partner. It's like, even in Rotary clubs and other places where we have, you are an old member, you're a new member. So old member, new member become buddies. And therefore the integration of the weaker bank or newer member happens in a slightly better fashion. So something very, very similar is happening here. They made a buddy system. A strong bank, a weak bank, merged together, so that the stronger bank and the stronger management will help the weaker bank to also become stronger, merge with themselves, and then thereafter, as a result of which, become a great bank put together. Further, the government also said that we will make 4 mega PSU banks. I mean, insanely large banks. Okay, so that was also happening. Governance in banking system was improving. At the same time, something that was never heard of in the bureaucratic sector, it almost worked like bureaucracy. You see, the state-owned banks and companies. But there were boards which were implemented to check on what? To check on compliance, to check on performance. Performance suddenly became a very important part. How are you performing? How are your loans performing? What sort of loans are you giving? What sort of interest are you earning? What is your margin, etc., so on and so forth. The board was going to be held accountable for their decisions, for the loans that they had given. Okay, internal controls were internal controls were put in. So you don't have instances like the Nirav Modi and the Vijay Mallya cases repeating again and again. We don't want to see those things happening. So penalties were going to be imposed, and at the same time, the banks were given more power to speed up the whole process of bad loans, to seize assets, to do securitization, to recover funds, so on and so forth. So Now, in the backdrop of all of this, now all this can't happen suddenly, right? But it was set into motion. It took a few years to happen. And today, you and I are talking about state-owned banks. Why are we talking about them? Because they have already run up, and in a bit I will show it to you. They've already run up almost 50 to 100% on the stock market in the last 1 year. So something is obviously cooking. Now, what is cooking is that all these problems have now become a problem of the past. They have been buried and the banks are moving forward. What's happening is all these 6, 7 years that it took to clean out things, that cleanup process is done. And now what you're seeing is a completely new avatar of your old fashioned state-owned banks, you see. Now, whether you talk in terms of technology, or you talk in terms of customer service, or you talk in terms of the presentation or the look and feel of the branches of these state-owned banks, it's amazing. It's a sea change, and I'm sure a lot of you would agree. We'll talk and we'll discuss more in this, in the Q&A section. We'll chat about this also. But so part one, cleanup happened in the banks, and part two, see, once the cleanup happens, governance is good, new management comes in, management has better ideas, they're given more freedom, lesser red tape, and all of that. What do you think will happen? There will be growth, right? And growth comes in from two sections. One is from the corporate sector, where they will need loans to build more capacity, to buy machinery, to do more production. And on the personal side, the demand will go up because we may want to buy more home loans, better properties, maybe more cars, and so on and so forth, even including consumer oriented purchases. So all of that is creating the demand. Now, pause here for a minute. Think about the defense sector that we were talking about, 194 startups. We spoke about hundreds of companies in this space. We spoke about lakhs and crores of revenue that is going to be earned by companies, but they cannot just earn it like that. The government wants to spend that money, but the company that has to manufacture it needs to have the capacity and the machinery and the land and the property and the skills and the manpower to be able to build it. For that, what you need is money. Now, that money will be given as loans by these banks, who now have better controls and better mechanisms of giving these loans, better realization mechanism, and they are not going to become bad debts. They're not going to become NPAs, because the administration is stronger, and so is the commitment from the banking side to make the banks grow and the corporate side to make the country grow. Both these things have come together in a unison, and which is why you are seeing that some of these state-owned banks, I don't know if you're seeing the news, but we are making record-breaking quarterly profits. Why quarterly profits excites everybody like us is because when you hear quarterly, quarter on quarter better results, it's like bigger and bigger doses of dopamine coming into your system, and you feel fabulous that the investment that I have made is into a group of companies, or it's into a mutual fund, or wherever it is. That sector is growing. It is just beginning to grow, or maybe the party is just about starting. So that is the power that you can see. Now, speaking of power, let's for a minute focus our attention onto power sector, infrastructure sector. I don't want to spend a lot of time here. We all know a lot about it, but the order books are multiplying. The order books are doubling and tripling. The order books, and without getting into specifics and numbers, from the readings that we've done, we've figured that there is so much order to make ships, to make submarines, to make arms and ammunition, to make guns, to make tanks. It's going to take already a few years. So the order books are full for a few years. What does that mean? And why is order book so important in this world? Because the order book gives you an estimate of how much revenue you will earn in the next few years. So what is visible is the cash inflow. Of course, now you have to produce that. That's the separate story. But there is visibility because of the past capability. We know that there is so much of orders sitting with our Indian companies. The result is going to be very simple. It's going to be an explosion in the growth that they will have. in the sales growth, in the profit growth, and the realization that you and I as investors will have through our investments in this space. But we need to be invested in this space. Now see, railways. We are not only manufacturing new trains and wagons for India, but we are also exporting them. Indian corporate sector and companies that have been around for 100 years have suddenly, because of the demand that is created, have got into the railway sector. Names that we would not imagine have started manufacturing, right from the rails for railways to wagons and coaches. This is happening by companies that are involved in manufacture of goods and services which are in the iron and steel and iron space. Okay, so that is happening. Roads, of course, is happening. We have our, Nitin Gadkari ji, who's talking about, infrastructure that we have not even imagined in terms of, we've only seen that in other countries of the world, but we are going to have that infrastructure and we are actually seeing that happening. Now, look at the most significant recent achievement, and I cannot help but not speak about it. Chandrayaan-3, the Indian space program. Suddenly, we are a country amongst the 4 countries who have not only successfully landed on the moon, but one country, the first time somebody's ever landed on the south side. Very interesting from the scientific point of view. So, leaving science there and coming to the commercial angle, what happens is when something so dramatic happens, India suddenly is sitting amongst the big boys league. Suddenly, we are recognized not only for our strength in defense and arms supplies, but also in other things like infrastructure and now in terms like space dominance. So because of that, suddenly what happens is there are a bunch of people who are investors into this, and suddenly they realize that if India is growing their space capability, and now very soon another mission is going to be launched to get into the halo orbit around the sun. So now these foreign institutions, large institutions who invest in India will suddenly sit back and take notice that if India is becoming so strong in the space department also, there are again hundreds of companies here which are extremely investable. Let's go and open their balance sheets. And the moment they open their balance sheets, they find, oh, these companies are doing fabulous business and they are not really dependent on foreigners giving them business. They are dependent because their own government wants to promote these companies in a fashion by which we become the number 1 player, even in space and infrastructure and renewable energy and power and banking and everything else. There is so much and more happening in this public sector space. Okay, so now enough talk. Jhaveri, put up that slide on the returns that some of these companies have given in the last 1 year. Can you just no? Can you just go ahead, please? Yeah, this one. Now, friends, unfortunately, while we are doing a live public sort of an event, I can't put the names here, but as you can see on the left column, what you see where it says company 1, company 2, company 3, this is the last 1 year performance of the stock price of some of these state-owned companies or government companies, or what we know as public sector enterprises. And the second table that you see on your right, in the center of the screen, are the banks. So there's about 12 banks there, state-owned. If you sort of knew how to do a little bit of go-to money control and find it, you will obviously know the answers to this also. But this is no secret. This is public data. This is public information. Look at the growth in these banks. The number 1 growth, this bank has grown about 163%. And we're talking exactly August to August. We are sitting on September 2. So this data is as recent as 31st October. 31st August. So it's 1 year old data. Look at these banks. Look at the kind of growth. The companies that you can see. I've taken a selection of 20 companies. There are at least 60 companies. I couldn't accommodate all of them, but at least the top 20 companies, look at the growth rates, astounding. Now, what if your portfolio was here? Now, what is very interesting, again, is to understand that a lot of these companies may not be your large cap, may not be your small cap. Okay. Now, I want to just go. Can you go 2-3 slides ahead where we can show the performance of the market? And just go ahead. We have, yeah, okay. Now, just friends, pay attention to this, okay? what's happening here is this is your Nifty, okay, or which is the market or the Sensex, whichever way you are looking at it or whatever index you prefer. 1st of January this year, we were at 18,000, some 200 approximately. Today, 8 months down, we are at 19,200. We went up, we came down, but the year-to-date return for the index has been about 6%. All right. And this is next 50 companies, pretty much the same. So all the great companies that are there in your portfolio, most of the times, the portfolios, the blue chip portfolios that we have, which is the do-it-yourself portfolios or the large portfolios of the large caps and the blue chip portfolios that we have, they are in this space. We may think, what's happening? What's the big deal? Nothing really is happening. Okay. But I just showed you a moment ago the returns that some of these state-owned companies have been generating in the last 1 year. Next slide, please. Take me to the next one. And I said that a lot of these companies are actually the mid caps and the small caps. Okay. Now look at this. 1st January to 31st August. What has been the growth in the mid cap space? It has been 23%. What's been the growth in the small cap space? 25%. This is 8 months of this calendar year, and we still have October, November, December, September, October, November, and December to go. And October, November, December are historically very, very strong months for the market. So a good part of the growth will happen in these 3 months. I mean, it's just historical data, but it has happened consecutively and consistently. So which means I would hazard to say that we might even see another maybe 15 or 20% sort of a growth by December, if not by March of 2024. So imagine this year, it's going to be a fabulous year. And this year is going to be a year of mid caps and a year of small caps. And who are these mid caps and small caps really? A big percentage of this is the public sector. Of course, there are lots of other mid caps and small cap also. I mean, there are, the moment, going back to Chandrayaan-3, the moment that spacecraft touched the surface of the moon, what happened in the next 3 days is there was an explosion on Instagram, on all the social media, talking about how everybody who had anything to do with this mission started talking about how they contributed, whether it was a supplier of hardware or computers from a small little shop in Mumbai, or for that matter, a factory who did something, or a food company which sent food to the people who were involved in doing, I mean, to the thousands of people who were involved in creating this whole mission to make it happen. I mean, everybody started talking about how they contributed here. But those are the companies, plus our state-owned companies, they are the ones who are making this huge return possibility for us. Now, I think that the PSU story is just beginning. You can stop share, please. I think this story is just about, starting to happen. And as usual, there is not too much of talk about it, but this index is also going to actually go places. Let me actually show you some index data also, something very interesting. Let me just show you what, I keep saying, right, that we have different indices now. I mean, just looking at the Nifty and the Sensex on its own is not good enough, but we need to look at different indices. So what we are going to look at is, I'm going to show you, here's the PSU Bank Index. Okay, I'm going to remove all the geometry from here. So it just makes it very, very simple for you to see. Okay. See, this is the reason what you see on your screen here is a representation. Very simple. I'll make it a line, which is very easy to see. Very simple, right? There is nothing happening in this space. From 2004 to 2010, there was a bit of an up move, but from 2010 to almost now, if you can see, we've been in this big rectangle. Nothing has happened, right? I mean, this index went down and up, etc., but nothing concrete really happening here. We've been in this box for a long time, but there is something which has changed here. Of course, this was 2020 low. This was the COVID low. But if you sort of even ignore this COVID recovery, start looking at growth from this point onwards, it's not that we have lost a lot. It's just 22. So this is about June or July of 22, and we are today in August of 23. A lot of time hasn't passed by us. The rally hasn't even begun, because for a rally to really happen, you know what must happen? Let me show you. I'm just going to compress this thing. For a rally to really happen, for a breakout to happen, something like this has to happen. Okay. Do you see what I mean? If this was the past, maybe a good period, then maybe this everything together is going to be the golden period. So we may say we might be at the half of it, but technically speaking, this is going to be extremely powerful. And obviously, you can't do anything about the past, but we are today in 2023 of September, and it's up to us if we want to take a huge leap into this sector, because not because I'm saying so, but because there is data which is saying that these companies are going to make some crazy profits in the years to come. The business is going to be robust and the growth is going to be phenomenal. There is another index also. This is called the Public Sector Enterprise Index. See, there are a lot of indices, because only if you look at indices, these different indices, then we get a sense of who's doing how and which sector is going to move where, which one is really getting ready for a takeoff. Again, look at this PSE index. It's been in a box for how long? From 2007 till 2023. 16 years it's been in a box. It had a good run, and in this period from the year 2000 till about 2007. But that hasn't happened again, and which means now this is going to happen. Why? Like I said, because of the date. So, friends, that's where I want to stop. 11:40 as usual.